This is the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast, presented by thehoosier.com. Hey, before we jump into this episode of the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast, make sure you are subscribed to the Hoosier on 3 on YouTube for all the IU content you could need, including press conferences, highlights, recruiting updates, the Hoosier tailgate, and of course, the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast. Also, go follow Talkin Bout The Hoosiers on Spotify. We really appreciate it and hope you enjoy this episode of the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast.
Hey, what's going on, Hoosier Nation? Hey, real quickly before we get started here with this video, make sure you go over to thehoosier.com and join for just $1 in your first week. With that, you get a free year subscription to theathletic.com, where you can also check out all of their content as well. Come over to thehoosier.com, join the best IU community there is out there. We'd love to have you.
Hello, Hoosier Nation, and welcome back to the Talking About the Hoosiers podcast. I'm joined by Zach Browning. I'm Drew Rosenberg. Big show today. We're talking Indiana football. And then later, Brandon Ramsey from KSR.com is going to join me and Kyler, and we're going to talk some Indiana basketball ahead of the Kentucky-Indiana rivalry officially coming back. But, Zach, we got to start with football. The Indiana Hoosiers are Big Ten champions. I don't know about you. I don't think I ever thought this was ever, possible.
Yeah. I don't know if it's still, I guess it's sunk in for a lot of the Indiana fans that we see around Bloomington, but this is one of those where whenever you started your Indiana fandom, whether you've been a fan for 70 years, 30 years, if you've been an Indiana fan for 5 years, whatever it is, this team was 3-9 2 years ago. This team 2 years ago just lost to Purdue. They were unable to pick up a fourth down against Purdue. We lost them that game late in the final seconds. And then you fire your head coach. And then it's like, well, where does this program go from here? It's the losingest program in the history of college football. Where do they go from there? And the answer was Curt Cignetti. And the answer was a Big Ten title in 2 years. And I think it's just extraordinary because it's not just the fact that Curt Cignetti has turned around the losingest program in the history of college football, a program in Indiana that, let's face it, they're not a historically a good football program. But it's not just that he turned them from 3-9 when he took over to, they maybe made a bowl game. They got 8 wins here. They got 7 wins there. No, this is a Big Ten. This is the number one team in college football. Curt Cignetti has taken Indiana from the absolute bottom of the entire country, like one of the worst teams historically and one of the worst teams every year, to the pinnacle of college football. Obviously not a national championship, but the number one ranking, the Big Ten championship. It's really astounding.
No, I don't think anyone thought this was possible. It was when Curt Cignetti took over, it was if you win 6 games in your first year, that's a great year. If you're bowl eligible at Indiana consistently, you're doing a great job. Cignetti has shattered all of those expectations, and it's gone to the point where moving forward, if Indiana wins 6 games in a season, it's going to feel like a colossal failure. And that's just, a testament to the growth of the program, the investment from the top. Cignetti has made it very clear his connection to Scott Dolson and Pam Whitten. And, the investment in the football program is a big reason for the success, but Cignetti and his system, I don't know if there's a better coach in the country when it comes to, identifying talent. You see, the blue chip percentages, Indiana's towards the bottom of the country, talent-wise, when you're looking at 5 stars, 4 stars, all that. But it does not matter. And you see against an Ohio State team. Last year when this team played Ohio State, they got bullied in the trenches. It was clear, Indiana was a good football team, but they, there was still a big gap between them and, the top dogs in college football. Against Ohio State, who, still has an argument as the best team in college football. I think you say it's Indiana because they won that game. But they played that game 10 times. I feel like they probably split the way that game was played. It was as even of a football game as you can imagine. But they dominated the Ohio State offensive line was in shambles most of that game. Julian Sain got sacked, I want to say 5 times in that game, and he hadn't been sacked. He had been sacked 6 times all year coming into that game. Incredible performance from the defensive line.
Yeah, and that's really the biggest thing. And it's not just the identifying talent, it's the then subsequently maximizing that talent and getting the absolute most out of every single player on the roster. And I wrote about this in the lead up to that Big Ten championship game. It's not just Curt Cignetti. Obviously, he's the head coach. He gets a lot of the headlines. It's the same way with any football team. The quarterback is the most important player. He's going to get a lot of the headlines. head coach is the most important person within the program. He's going to get a lot of the headlines, but it's really just the staff as a whole. You can go up and down the entire staff, offensively, defensively, whether it's Brian Haynes being one of, if not the best defensive coordinators and assistant coaches in the entire country. Mike Shanahan, the play calling that we talked about, Drew, it was going to be key to open up the playbook and let Fernando be a Heisman-type player. That's exactly what he did with those deep shots to Charlie Becker. Whether it's Chandler Whitmer and his NFL experience as the QB coach, whether it's Bob Bostad, who I'm not sure there's anybody in the country that has one bad word to say about Bob Bostad, to the defensive line coaches, and you bring up the defensive line. It's funny because the offensive line of the year finalists, the collective unit, the voting that is on the collective offensive line that was the best in the country, those finalists, they came out last week, and Indiana is one of those finalists. The Hoosiers, one of the 3 offensive lines that's one of those finalists. But the other finalists are Oregon. So 3 Big Ten schools are the finalists for offensive line of the year. That Oregon offensive line, that I guess because they're a finalist, you would consider them to be a top 3 offensive line in the country. Drew, IU had 6 sacks against them. You go to Iowa. I think Indiana only had 1 sack against Iowa, but multiple tackles for loss, a plethora of tackles for loss. And Gronowski, when he was in the game and healthy, is more of a mobile quarterback, so not easy to bring down for a quote-unquote technical sack. But still, the 2 best offensive lines in the country, outside of Indiana, according to the Offensive Line of the Year award finalists, Iowa and Oregon. Indiana was fantastic defensively against those offensive lines, which really does show you just how good in the trenches Indiana is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the biggest difference when you compare last year's team to this year's team. It's the trenches. Indiana on both sides added some key guys. We're gonna talk. We're gonna talk Stephen Daley in a little bit. Brutal news for him. But you add a guy like Stephen Daley. He steps up. Kellen Wyatt, who again another one who's down and out for the year, was stepping up and playing really well before the injury. But you also have Tyreek Tucker taking that next step. And yeah, Mikhail Kamara might not have, the counting stats that you're looking at, but he's eating double teams and still making plays in the backfield where, on paper, it's like, oh, where was he? But then you watch the game and you see the impact he has for Indiana. And it's that growth, it's that testament. And then you said it, maximizing talent. And that's what this staff does so well. And it's why they're the number 1 team in the country right now, despite having no 5 stars on the roster, minimal 4 stars, and a bunch of guys that are hungry and, want to prove everyone wrong. And that's what we've seen with this Indiana team all year.
Yeah. And if we do kind of, I guess, segue into that injury along the defensive line for Indiana, Stephen Daley obviously confirmed, we're recording this on Wednesday, that he will be missing likely the rest of the season. Recently confirmed. So you think about it, that's 2 injuries at that kind of opposite edge spot of Mikhail Kamara. You had Kellen Wyatt earlier in the year. You have Stephen Daley now. First off, freak accident, really unfortunate for a guy in Daley whose college career is coming to an end and has no more years of eligibility left. But if you're Indiana, and this goes back to what we were just talking about a second ago, maximizing the talent out of everybody and maximizing every single player, you would expect that Daniel Ndukwe is kind of that next man up. He's been the guy that, while Mikhail Kamara has kind of dealt with his shoulder injuries and the lingering issues he has this year, Daniel Ndukwe has been the guy that steps up. And so I think Indiana is expecting not a lot, but not necessarily a huge drop-off. Obviously, Stephen Daley leads the country in tackles for loss. There's going to be a drop-off. But Daniel Ndukwe, 6'3", 244, and I think the biggest thing is that he's a sophomore. He's been in the system now. This is his second year. He's been in the system. He knows Bryant Haynes. He knows Pat Kuntz and Buda Williams, his defensive line coaches. He knows them. He knows the system. Yeah. It's not like there's going to be any steep learning curve. It's just whether or not he has the talent and the production at this point in his career to be able to go out and do that and produce like Indiana really hopes he can in the absence of Stephen Daley. But Indiana's been the same way, and it's not a great comparison, Drew, but it's the comparison that drops into my head first. When Elijah Surratt went out earlier in the season, there were some people that were like, oh, the sky's falling. What's Indiana going to do in the receiving core? Who's going to step up with Elijah Surratt out? And now there's a case for Charlie Becker to be one of the best receivers in the Big Ten. Yeah. He's been that good for Indiana over the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season. And not many people around the Big Ten. I'd even say that there was a handful of Indiana fans that didn't really know or weren't familiar with Charlie Becker before he came in against Penn State for Elijah Surratt. So I think not that Daniel Ndukwe will have that same effect where he'll come in just like Charlie Becker did and kind of wreak havoc on the game and put up big stats and big numbers. But I would hesitate people to kind of take a chill pill if you're super concerned that Daniel Ndukwe is going to come in and there's going to be a massive drop-off. There will be probably a sizable drop-off. Obviously, we've talked about how important Stephen Daley is. But this team, up and down the roster, whether it's Ajani stepping up in the offensive line, whether it's Kobe Martin and what he's done in his limited snaps this season in the running back room after Lee Beebe went down, up and down the roster, there's examples of guys filling in and guys stepping up for other guys and coming in and really picking up the slack right where it was left off.
Yeah, and I mean, you have a defensive coordinator in Brian Haynes, who's one of the best at, scheming pressures in the country. So, it is a big loss, but when you look at this Indiana defense, the linebacking core plays such a role in a lot of the, the defensive line. It's a lot of like clogging things up to open stuff up for Elijah Hardy and Isaiah Jones and Aiden Fisher to get in the backfield and make plays. And I do think, maybe we'll see a little bit different look of the Indiana defense when we finally do see Indiana play on New Year's. But Brian Haynes, I'm not, it's a loss. It is a big loss. It hurts. Stephen Daley led the Big Ten in tackles for loss. No, we're not going to pretend like this isn't a major loss and a brutal injury. Just, walking around high-fiving fans. Like, no one thinks he's going to get hurt. Like, no one thinks they're going to get hurt like that. It's doing something he's done every day for his entire life since he could walk. And, just one step, and it's brutal. It's a brutal injury, but Indiana, it's next man up. Everyone is hurt in this point in the season. There isn't there's very few teams that are able to stay healthy. Indiana has stayed relatively healthy for the most part this season, but every team is dealing with some injuries to some extent, and you got to just have that next man up mentality. And I think Brian Haynes, if anyone, is able to, overcome a big injury to the defensive line, I think it's him.
And I brought up Daniel Ndukwe, and I should say there's options for Indiana up front. You can move Mario Landino to the outside and have him play edge, and then you just have Hosea Wheeler or Dominique Ratcliffe, who've gotten plenty of snaps, just step up as a starter on the interior. So there's options. It's not just like Indiana has one option. It's going to be Daniel Ndukwe that steps up. The Hoosiers, Brian Haynes, Buda Williams, Pat Coots up front on that defensive line. They have options there.
Yeah. Let's jump into a playoff a little bit. The bracket is out. We see Indiana's first round matchup is either going to be the winner of Oklahoma and Alabama. I feel like Indiana got a pretty favorable draw for the beginning first games. Notre Dame not being in is kind of a big win for Indiana because it probably would have been Notre Dame in that 10 spot and or the 9 spot. But if as good as Alabama and Oklahoma are, I look at them and there's glaring weaknesses, and Alabama's been struggling for the last month or so.
That's the thing. You look at those teams, and yes, it's a favorable draw. I think the general consensus is that there's a kind of a drop off. You have the top, we'll say top 4 teams. Those top 4 teams that all have buys: IU, Georgia, Ohio State, Texas Tech. You could throw Oregon in there too, but I think then there's kind of a consensus that there's a little bit of a drop off to Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Miami. But I think it's hilarious that IU could just play all crimson-colored teams or red-colored teams the entire way through this playoff run should Indiana make it far. But you look at whoever it is, Alabama, they've got the star quarterback, Ty Simpson, but it's been inconsistent for Alabama this year. Obviously, they're coming off the loss in the SEC championship, but a rather uncompetitive loss to a really good Georgia team. Then on the flip side, Oklahoma, John Mateer, started the year. He's always one of the top quarterbacks in the country. Got hurt early in the year and hasn't necessarily been able to really regain what that magic was at the beginning of the season. I think the biggest thing with Oklahoma is you look at is that is a really elite defense, like up there with the IU defense, the Ohio State defense, the Texas Tech and Oklahoma defense. Those are like the consensus probably top 4 defenses in the country, I would say. So you could be looking at another low-scoring game there. If there's a matchup, maybe Indiana would prefer Alabama. Again, this is me saying just my opinion, but maybe if you're Indiana, you prefer the matchup with Alabama just so you don't have to go up against the elite defense of Oklahoma. Not that Oklahoma would figure speculate to be able to move the ball too well against Indiana's defense. But, when you're looking at the potential outcomes, you look at those two with Alabama and with Oklahoma. And then in that semifinal, should Indiana win their quarterfinal game, you've got the likes of Texas Tech and Oregon. I'm sure Indiana would love to avoid Oregon and playing them a second time this season. The old adage, the saying goes, it's hard to beat a team twice in the same year. But you're on the opposite side of the bracket as Georgia and Ohio State. So I think if you're Indiana, you got to be happy with that.
Yeah, they have some predicted odds out for Indiana's potential matchups. Indiana's a 7-point favorite against Alabama, 9.5-point favorite over Oklahoma. Obviously, that will probably change, depending on how that game pans out, who looks good. But that Oklahoma defense is legit. But the offense you mentioned, Indiana's defense is going to have the advantage on that matchup. And like we saw against Ohio State, that defense, even when the Indiana offense is struggling, the defense is going to always keep them in games. And I don't know if Oklahoma's going to have the offense to score. And then flip side, Alabama, that it's back and forth. When Bama's on, they've been one of the best teams in the country. We saw it. They went into Georgia and won one of the best wins in the country, probably two best wins in the country. Indiana going to Oregon and winning that game, and Alabama going to Georgia and winning that game. But when they're off, they're off. We've seen them in dogfights against South Carolina, gave up a lot of points versus Arkansas. So what Alabama do we see in the playoff? And, there's a reason Indiana is a comfortable favorite in both games right now.
Yeah, and that's where you get into the situation where you've got two teams and it's different because Indiana they don't know who they're going to play yet. So you're waiting, you're going to do preparation on both teams, you're waiting, then you can kind of focus on the prep on one team. So it's been brought up, the fact that the teams with the byes last year all lost in the college football playoff, and I'm sure that's been brought up, and it goes back to the preparation, and it's why you trust in Curt Cignetti, because of the preparation, and specifically a guy like Fernando Mendoza, the quarterback, the most important player on the team. The preparation is important. You have to be able to prepare for both teams and then be able to eliminate one team altogether when you find out who you're going to play.
Yeah, and last year was a little weird too because, you had Arizona State, Boise State getting byes because of the way it was the auto done. Now with it being the best four teams, the four teams who got the byes are likely going to be favored. The only one I'm not sure about is Oregon, Texas Tech. That one could be a toss-up in my eyes, but Ohio State, Georgia, and Indiana will all be favorites in their second round game. So, it's going to be really interesting to watch. Can Indiana, avoid a rematch with Oregon? Can Texas Tech beat them? Well, but Indiana also has to take care of business for Alabama, Oklahoma. At this point, you can't hide. Everyone who is here is still very good. But last thing before we wrap up and move over to basketball, we got to talk some Heisman a little bit. Fernando Mendoza, it feels like he took control of the Heisman race on Saturday, minus 2,000 right now, according to BetMGM. Diego Pavia is second at plus 1,000. And then the other two finalists, Jeremiah Love and Julian Sane, both extreme long shots. I think the biggest thing against Mendoza is the fact that Indiana was so good that he sat out so many fourth quarters. Where you look at the efficiency stats, the counting stats, you look at them, they don't jump off the page to you. But then you realize, oh, wait, and what was it, 6 games he sat out the entire fourth quarter and a couple others sat out half of the third quarter. If Indiana was, if Cignetti was going to let him stat pad, which, we saw a little bit with Lamar Wilkerson last night staying in the game for some records, Fernando Mendoza would have put up some monster numbers, and this wouldn't even be a conversation. Diego Pavia is doing all the motivation and ads he can do to push his Heisman candidacy. But I think when you watch the two play, the games Mendoza's won at Oregon, at Iowa, against Ohio State, game-winning drive against Penn State. Pavia, his Heisman moment was last year against Alabama, and that does not count towards this year. If that game against Alabama when he beat them was this year, might be a different story, but it wasn't. And that's kind of my whole thing. Pavia is an incredible quarterback. I just think Fernando's the better player.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you. I think that there's two ways that people analyze and look at the Heisman. There's the statistical side, and then there's the I watched them play, did they have any Heisman moments kind of side. And if we look at the statistical side, the knock against Fernando is how are you going to have a Heisman quarterback that didn't pass for 3,000 yards in a season? That's never happened. But again, as you mentioned, he didn't play a lot of fourth quarters this year, and it's not like Pavia lit it up for 4,000 passing yards. Pavia just under 3,200 passing yards. Fernando more passing touchdowns, more total touchdowns, less interceptions. So the statistical standpoint, I guess you could call it a wash. Fernando, more touchdowns, less interceptions. Pavia, more total yards, the rushing yards heavily in Pavia's favor, but Fernando's not a huge rusher. He didn't really need to be. But then you look at the Heisman moments, and I think I agree with you here, Drew. This is where the biggest discrepancy lies, is that you look at Fernando, game-winning touchdown pass against Iowa. It came on the road. It's not at home. That's a big Heisman moment. A game-sealing drive, a game-winning drive against Oregon on the road against a team that at the time was a top 3 team in the country. That's a Heisman moment. You look at Penn State, however good you think Penn State was, or however bad you think Penn State was, going 87 yards with no timeouts and 90 seconds to play, throwing a game-winning touchdown pass that is perhaps one of the greatest throws and catches in the history of the Indiana program. That's a Heisman moment. You go into a Big Ten championship against the big bad Buckeyes of Ohio State. It's David versus Goliath. It's number 1 versus number 2, but Ohio State's the consensus number 1 team in the country and the favorites, according to most. You go out and beat them. That's a Heisman moment. You look at Diego Pavia. You talked about the Alabama game last year. This year, he beat Auburn in overtime, a game-winning pass in overtime against Auburn, but that Auburn team wasn't very good. It was overtime, so there was bound to be a game-winning pass in that. It's not like you won it in regulation. Literally, you have to have a game-winning score either way in an overtime game. So the Heisman moments, it just tilts so much heavily in favor of Mendoza that I think that's why he has this all but locked up.
Yeah, and it's, Pavia, some of the numbers are great. And like you look at some of their losses, like he played well in the losses, but then you look at a game like Texas, if you look at the box score, it's 34-31. Pavia had over 400 total yards, 4 touchdowns, no picks. And then you go back and look at the game and you're like, wait, they were down 34-10 in the fourth quarter. And, they made it close in the end, but very similar to Indiana in the playoff against Notre Dame, to where that game was never really close, but it turned into a 1-possession loss or I guess Indiana was 2 because they didn't get the 2-point conversion in the end, but one of those games. And it's just hard for me to knock Mendoza. It's like if you're punishing Mendoza for winning games dominantly, I find that I just can't see that happening.
And the biggest thing is if you go out and you read online or you listen to any Vanderbilt fan or any person that thinks that Pavia should win it, they talk about Pavia's Heisman moments are just statistical moments. They bring up the Kentucky game when he beat Kentucky, who is bad, 45-17, and put up, I think it was close to 500 passing yards. It was like 480 something. It was a school record for Vanderbilt when he beat Kentucky. Again, Kentucky probably isn't a good team, but those are the type of Heisman moments that Pavia had. His Heisman moments were statistical moments and statistical feats, and not that Fernando didn't have those himself, but again, the statistics, it's kind of a wash, and you have to go to the Heisman moments, who led their team in a game-winning drive. And maybe you can't fault Pavia on this. He didn't really have the opportunity to really go on any game-winning drives. The games they won pretty handily. The games they lost, they didn't. So maybe to no fault of Pavia's own, he just doesn't have the opportunities for the Heisman stuff, and he doesn't have really those Heisman moments, those Heisman drives on film.
Yeah, and I think, it's the thing that holds him back. He's had an incredible year. I just think Fernando Mendoza's been better. But I think that's going to do it for us. We're going to be back in just a sec after a quick break from some ads. And Brandon Ramsey and Kyler Staley are going to join me, and we're going to talk some Indiana, Kentucky.
Hoosier Nation, the Indiana football team once again made history by making the college football playoffs and are the number 1 overall seed in the entire thing. But now here's your chance to bring home history yourself with the official Indiana Football Limited Edition College Football Playoff Football. This exclusive football is a symbol of excellence, built for the biggest stage in the sport and capturing the pride, passion, and performance of playoff football. It's a must-have gift for collectors, alumni, students, and just diehard fans. Get your exclusive football only at BigGameUSA.com. Don't just witness history, own history.
As you all probably know by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use the bonus code ON3, and you'll get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using the bonus code ON3. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game. You'll receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets if your bet loses. Just make sure you use the bonus code ON3 when you sign up. Make this college football season one for the history books. Make it legendary. We'll be right back, but first we have to talk to you guys about Rhoback Activewear. There's only one way to describe Rhoback. Best fit, best feel. For those who aren't familiar with Rhoback, they're completely changing the game with their incredibly comfortable activewear. Rhoback has released so many items within their new licensed game day collection, and it's our favorite. With novel polo designs and clean hoodie and Q-zip designs from some of your favorite schools, including the Indiana Hoosiers, it's definitely worth checking out. Nobody else in the market is pairing these level of custom designs with this quality of activewear. Rhoback's everyday shorts or their Delta Performance pants are the perfect pairing as well. They're both super comfortable, have an elastic waistband, and great fabric that is made to have the appearance of a nice short look, but the comfort for a day on the move. Rhoback has also been proudly leading the NIL charge, having signed partnerships with multiple college football stars, past and present, and are becoming the go-to brand for college athletes across the country. Use the code IND20 on Rhoback.com for a generous 20% off for all new customers throughout the end of the week. That's spelled RHOBACK.com. That's 20% off all performance polos, shorts, and more with the code IND20. Now back to the rest of this episode of the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast. Now joining the show is a very special guest making his second appearance on Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast, Prep Hoops Indiana, and KSR's very own Brandon Ramsey. Welcome in, Brandon.
Hey, Drew. Thanks for having me on again. Got a big game to talk about here, don't we?
Yeah, it's great. We can, like, last time it was like previewing this game a year away. Now we're, finally here talking Indiana, Kentucky. This is awesome.
Yeah, it's very exciting to have this rivalry back. I have a pretty unique view of this rivalry as somebody who, it cheers for Kentucky and writes for KSR, but also spends my life living in Indiana and certainly have some connections to the Hoosiers. So this is always the one near and dear to my heart, especially as somebody who, I guess I would say, unfortunately, was at the last game that we played with the Watford shot about 14 years ago. So
Was that the last game?
well, I guess we technically played the NCAA tournament. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the last regular season game.
Yeah, and that was the NCAA tournament. That was the Yogi Ferrell team.
Jamal Murray, Yogi Ferrell, Jamal, Great backcourt battle.
It's so crazy that this game it's taken this long since 2016, like for it to happen, and it's just great to have it back. And obviously, it starts off with Rupp this year, and then I think it's Lucas Oil after that, and then back at Rupp, and then at Assembly Hall, and hopefully, Coach Mark Pope and Coach DeVries can get another contract kind of put together and stuff, and just have it extended forever.
That'd be nice. Yeah, I mean, I think these are two teams that should play each other. It's two very historic programs, obviously close in proximity as well. So yeah, I think it's good for the game. It's good for both programs. It's good for the states. I think when these two teams play.
Now, did you grow up like obviously the rivalry was going on and stuff? Did you grow up like not liking Indiana, or how'd that kind of go about?
So the story with that, I always say I became a fan free agent when Coach Knight got fired. I was 8 years old. My parents were both IU alums. My dad was an 87 grad, so he was there for the last national championship. I grew up going to I would have been an Indiana fan if Coach Knight did not get fired. My dad was one that essentially cut ties with the university when that happened, and my parents have mostly converted to being Kentucky fans as well. They over the years that's softened now that a lot of the people that were involved in that decision are gone. Like they definitely have kind of jumped back on the bandwagon of the football team. They know, like, especially my dad, like for a long time it was like cheering against Indiana. Now it's kind of apathetic, more or less, in terms of how they do. But yes, I 100% would have been on your guys' side of this podcast if something didn't happen in the year 2000. So I was able to kind of choose my own path as a fan at a pretty impressionable age, and I steered a little bit south, I guess.
Well, for the sake of this podcast, I'm glad that you're a Kentucky fan, or else we wouldn't have very much to talk
Right.
about here. So, okay, I'll kind of get us started here, and just kind of start with this current Kentucky team. Obviously, it's been kind of I don't want to say like anything harsh or anything, but a little rocky. I guess really that's kind of how it's been.
You could be much more harsh, Kyler, and Big Blue Nation would very much have your back.
So I think I was looking at a stat. So you guys, Kentucky's played 4 top 100 teams, I think, and haven't won one yet. And obviously, there was that struggles with Gonzaga and North Carolina, I think, came in as well and won at Rupp, if I can remember correctly. And it just seems like just a very hot topic, obviously topics of conversation, with this Kentucky team, the roster and things. And I guess from your point of view, how bad has it really gotten? Like, are these things fixable? Like, kind of give me your kind of insight, what's going on with Kentucky right now.
Yeah, it hasn't gone well. Injuries have been a part of that since the. I mean, one of the big ones we knew about, so it's hard to really use as an excuse. But obviously, Jaden Quanitz is a potential NBA lottery pick if and when he gets healthy this season. We knew we wouldn't have him essentially to this point in the season, and that has remained the case. But then also the point guard that we recruited to be the starting point guard all year, who was an all ACC guy last year at Pittsburgh, Jalen Lowe, he has played minimally. He's missed, I believe, he's missed 7 of the 10 games and has played, pretty sparingly in the ones that he has been available for. Then now Mo Diabate, who was our starting 4-man, came over. He was a 6th man last year at Alabama. He's been injured now for 4 straight games. So key injuries. I've said it a million times on Kentucky centric websites and podcasts that any team in the country, if you're missing 3 starters, isn't going to be very good.
Right.
Now you run out of a little bit of patience and people don't feel so sorry for you when you have the highest NIL payroll in the country, and you kind of bragged about that in the offseason. And all of a sudden, as you can imagine, both Big Blue Nation and everybody else, like, nobody's really feeling sorry for Kentucky for having a few injuries and losing some games. So yeah, I think, at this point in the year, Kentucky hasn't lost to anybody bad by any means. I mean, heck, the 4 teams Kentucky's lost to, I think, are all ranked in the top 14 this week. And then we've kind of beaten the crap out of the 6 bye games that we've played. But it's hard to really judge right now where they are because we have no kind of middle ground to see, okay, how does this Kentucky team match up against kind of an average or a good team? Like, we've only played really, really good teams and really, really bad teams. And right now it's led to kind of a pretty big unknown for what exactly this Kentucky team is going to be this year.
Absolutely. And how do you think Coach Bove's kind of handled all of this right now?
Not super well. He almost, like, he kind of takes it personally, but like in a bad way, that he puts so much pressure on himself because he was a captain here, because he won a national championship at Kentucky, that he knows how much this means to everybody. And I think it truly means so much to him too. Like, this is more than just being the head coach at Kentucky. Like, he bleeds blue, kind of like the crazy people on KS board and the rest of us do. So like it really, really bothers him that it's not going well, like kind of to the point where it's almost not healthy at times. And I think that he's, kind of working through that now that he's facing adversity, in a pretty major way after, things in year 1 went pretty well, considering when he got the job, kind of the haste with which he had to build the roster. I thought that last season, everybody was, his approval rating going into this season was very, very high. And then as Indiana fans can appreciate, we have short memories, and it's kind of what have you done for me lately? And now his approval rating is not very high. But I think that he's struggling to get the pulse of this team, and that's continued to be a work in progress as we get close to conference season here.
And obviously, injuries, to fix injuries, you just got to get healthy, right? That's the main thing, get your guys healthy and stuff. But as far as you throw injuries off to the side or whatever, what are the main things that you can do right now as a quick fix for Kentucky? Is it just beating a team like Indiana, getting like a good top 100 win? Like, is it as simple as that? Or
there's definitely some of that. Yeah. I mean, I think that everybody involved, from the coaching staff to the players to the fan base, they need something kind of positive to happen. That they need something to feel good about that isn't beating Ken Palm number 350 North Carolina State on Tuesday night. Like they need to feel like there's something that is moving this team in the right direction. And some of that is getting back to the basics, finding some sort of a defensive identity. Defense was supposed to be a major calling card of this team, and quite frankly, that has not been the case to this point in the season. Last year, we saw Kentucky be one of the best shooting teams in college basketball. It appears that was a pretty glaring miss in the build of this roster. Kentucky is quite simply not shooting the ball very well. There's a very stark contrast in the 4 quad 1 games Kentucky's played. I tweeted this out earlier today. Kentucky's shooting something like 24%, and in the quad 4 games, they're shooting like 38%. So if you just look at the aggregate numbers, you're going to be like, oh, well, no, Brandon, like Kentucky's not that bad. Well, when they play the teams that are actually pretty good, the shots haven't gone in. So you hope there's some progression to the mean there. But yeah, you're absolutely right. You have to get healthy. You have to spend some time with guys being healthy so you can get some continuity both in practice and on the floor. And then I think, just kind of getting this team to gel has taken longer, certainly, than it did last year. And I think everybody involved with the program is just kind of having to go through some growing pains to reach the ultimate goal.
I mean, you talk about getting healthy. You got to start with Jaden Quaintance. When do you kind of expect him to be back for you guys? Because that's, I mean, in the portal, like when he entered the portal, he was one of the top portal gets for anyone in the country. Guy who probably should be a freshman should have been in high school last year, averaged almost a double, and was supposed to be one of your best players this year. So when do you see him coming back for you guys?
It'll be soon. Now, we all have different definitions of soon. He is playing 5-on-5 now in practice with some contact and all of that. So I think he's in the final stages of his kind of ramp up to actually seeing the floor. Now, as you can imagine, both everyone around him and even the people on Kentucky's side want to be pretty cautious with this. He has agents and people in his ear telling him, hey, like, you're a lottery pick. Let's not, risk this and rush back too soon. But Kentucky obviously wants to protect some of this as well, because with the injuries you've already faced this season, you don't want to be in a position where you rush him back. And now, sure, it was great you had him for a couple of games, but you lose him for the rest of the season or whatever because he's not ready. But I think that right around the first of the year, give or take a week, is probably when you're going to see him. Like I think at this point, is he going to shock the world and play on Saturday? I will be shocked if that happens. But I think that probably any time after that after Kentucky plays IU, the next game is on the 20th against St. John's. I think probably starting that day and any time in the future, you're kind of on a official Jaden Quaintance watch at that point.
Okay. Speaking of, I guess, portal, you got one of the few misses Kentucky had was DeMar Wilkerson, coming off his best college game of his career, set the Assembly Hall scoring record, Indiana 3-point single game record. Do you expect a, hostile reception for him at Rupp on Saturday?
I was trying to find the mute button as you were saying that, because I really don't want to hear too much about Lamar Wilkerson right now. But hostile is not the right word, I don't think, because I mean it's not like he transferred from Kentucky.
Yeah, right.
Yes, Kentucky fans follow recruiting as intimately as any fan base, so obviously everybody in the gym is going to know that he was almost a cat, or could have been a cat, or however you want to say it. And then everybody's certainly going to know that he just scored 44 points and hit 10 threes in his last game. But no, I don't necessarily think it's going to be hostile. I think it's almost going to be more inwardly hostile, where as if Lamar Wilkerson starts hitting some threes, then it's going to be Kentucky fans yelling kind of at ourselves of like, gosh dang it, we wish we had this guy, as it is going to be directed at him.
Yeah, and obviously, I think Lamar's been on record too to be he just didn't know he didn't know if he fit well, with this Kentucky team. You don't know, because I mean, let's be honest with you. When you look at talent, across the board, Kentucky here, it's they have a pretty deep team. I mean, it is pretty balanced, and Lamar Wilkerson obviously comes in, he's looking to finish out his college career strong and play for a really good program and stuff. He wanted to go somewhere where he could be the guy now, and obviously like NIL played a factor as well with that and everything. But do you think, like, let's say if the universe is kind of switched up a little bit and Lamar did choose Kentucky, do you think that he would be the best player on this Kentucky team?
If he's playing like he is for Indiana, and if you just picked that up and dropped it in Kentucky, yes, he would be the best player on this Kentucky team right now. Now, can I understand why maybe he didn't see it that way in recruiting? Because yeah, I mean, you're returning Otega Owe, who's a preseason All-American this year. You have other pieces coming into the portal. Denzel Aberdeen coming off of a national championship team. Jalen Lowe, who was an All-Conference point guard last year at Pittsburgh. I can understand why maybe the clear path to stardom wasn't there on paper for Lamar Wilkerson, but certainly I think the way that things have played out both for him this season at IU and for Kentucky, it would be pretty hard to imagine a scenario where Lamar Wilkerson wouldn't be Kentucky's best player right now as well.
Right. And like, obviously we watched Lamar and stuff, and this was, I mean, he scored 44 points. That's easily his best game of the season and stuff. But, there was, Drew, I would say probably like 4-5 games or so. Yeah. He just had bad stretches, and Indiana was really kind of struggling to find out that balance, with like Tucker DeVries and, trying to get some help around him and stuff. Going into the matchup, I guess for you, Brandon, like, when you look at both teams, who's kind of like the X factor for both Kentucky and Indiana, if they want to come in, in this game on Saturday and they want to win?
I think that the X factor, probably as much as any person, it's going to be the 3-point shooting.
Yeah.
Right now, Kentucky is not doing a great job at taking the good opponents away from 3-point range. And obviously, to this point in the season, you could argue that IU is one of the best 3-point shooting teams in the country. Like, they are super high volume and very high percentage, 38.2% on the year, and shooting as many threes as anybody. So I think that, taking away Tucker DeVries, getting out there and taking away Lamar Wilkerson and some of these guys, like, that's going to be a major key for Kentucky defensively. And then conversely is, can Kentucky find a way to make perimeter shots against a quality opponent? Because so far, playing Gonzaga, Michigan State, North Carolina, and Louisville, Kentucky shot the ball pretty well against Louisville, but against those other three, it was a struggle from 3-point range. And I think that you're going to be in a situation where you can probably look at the 3-point differential in this game and look at the scoreboard, and they're going to be pretty telling kind of as a function of one another. If IU makes 4 more threes than Kentucky, IU's probably going to have a pretty good chance to win the game. As that number gets closer to even or certainly swings in Kentucky's favor, then I think that's where you see Kentucky have an advantage in this game. So I'm going to be really focused on both how Kentucky guards IU, an excellent 3-point shooting team from beyond the arc, but then also if this is a game where you can get something going from the perimeter if you're Kentucky as well.
Yeah, another guy I've kind of looked at could be a big X factor in this game. Another guy both schools were really going hard after, Malachi Moreno. Indiana, when you look at the roster, the lack of size, it's the biggest hole when you really look at the flaws of this roster. And Malachi Moreno at 7 feet or 7 feet, whatever he is, could be a problem, especially on the boards for Indiana when I'm looking at this game. But then you see him in his, Power 5. You mentioned, the difference between the Power 5 versus the non-con games. He struggled in the Power 5 games. So how do you see him playing, against a smaller Indiana team?
Yeah, I think he's going to be, you said it perfectly. He is sort of that X factor type of guy in a game like this, that if Kentucky's going to find a clear advantage, then maybe this would be one of the areas where they could have an advantage. Now, throwing that weight on the shoulders of a freshman in a game like this maybe is a little bit unfair, but he has had a probably surprisingly good start to the season, quite frankly. I mean, yeah, he was a McDonald's All-American, very highly recruited, but it's not like he was in the same vein as Caleb Wilson and the Boozer twins and guys like that. And he's had a pretty darn good start to his career. He's had a couple of double-doubles, and yes, he's struggled a little bit more against some of the best teams, but he still had 8 points and 9 rebounds against North Carolina, had 9 points against Michigan State, had 8 points against Louisville. So I think he's found some ways to be successful around the basket. He's very skilled with the ball in his hands. He's a very, very good passer. He's improved as the season went on from the free throw line. He's a very good offensive rebounder. So I think that if probably more than anything else, if he can help Kentucky get some second chances around the basket, that would be a key way that he could impact this game with his size.
Would you say overall, Brandon, Kentucky probably has the front court advantage in this game?
Probably so. I think that just given the kind of the raw size of Malachi Moreno, I think with the way that Andrea Yelovich has came on in the last couple of games for Kentucky as well, gives them some versatility in the front court. I think that certainly, like I said, if you're gonna point to an area where Kentucky has an advantage, it probably leans there in the front court. But the issue with that is that Kentucky isn't necessarily looking to play through those guys as much as they were like last year with an Amari Williams in the front court. Like, yes, you could maybe bang it inside to Malachi Moreno, bang it inside to Andrea Yelovich. Those guys have pretty efficient post-up numbers if you look at synergy and some of the other analytics, but that's just not really the way that Kentucky plays. So are you going to kind of go away from what you normally do to try to attack a mismatch against Indiana, or are you going to kind of try to play the way that you are a little bit more comfortable, even though that maybe doesn't give you as much of an advantage? I think that'll be something that certainly the coaching staff is spending the next 48 hours or so in terms of game planning, figuring out exactly how they want to attack that in terms of that potential advantage in the front court.
Yeah, and like obviously with Indiana, they really struggle with defensive rebounding as well, and that's kind of part of their, I guess, DeVries's DNA. When you can have a good team that can be a defensive rebounding team, can get out and transition, push the ball up. They obviously want to do that, and that's when Indiana's at their best. If you watch them, it's when they're competing on the defensive glass, pushing the ball out, live ball turnovers and things like that. It seems like, with any team, not just necessarily Kentucky, if they can limit Indiana, from being, having chances with defensive rebounding, it could just really kind of halt Indiana's momentum at any given moment, because they can get in a half court setting. Indiana can, and move the ball really well. They're definitely probably a much better ball movement team than what we've seen the past 8 years, with Indiana. But a half court setting is definitely not their strength right now.
Absolutely, and that's why when I was talking about the way that Kentucky shoots the ball, I think that's what again that's another reason why that's important. It's much harder to get into transition after a made shot. So if you can see the ball go in some, and then certainly another a way to impact that is with those second chances, with some of that offensive rebounding. Kentucky's not necessarily a team that traditionally crashes the offensive glass super hard, kind of in the same vein as that's not something that IU looks to do as much either. You're kind of more lean towards transition defense than you are really crashing the offensive glass. But I think that if you can see either one of these teams take an advantage in terms of second chances and getting some additional possessions in that manner, that'll be probably another key factor when you're looking at how the scoreboard turns out at the end of the game.
Okay, Brandon, I got 2 questions for you. I'm going to start with the first one. Can you finish this sentence for me? Kentucky wins this game because?
Kentucky wins this game because they have their best defensive effort of the season, which includes taking away Indiana from 3-point range, like we've talked about quite a bit here on this show. But we've talked about it a lot because I think it's so important. So I think if Kentucky limits Indiana to 8 or fewer threes, something like that, 7 or 8 threes, and which will certainly take, like I said, Kentucky's best defensive effort of the season, then I think that you'll find a way to score enough points at home to win the game if you don't let the Hoosiers get hot from beyond the arc.
Okay, and then I'm going to flip it. Kentucky loses this game because
Lamar Wilkerson plays like he did against Penn State. I mean, it's just, seriously though, I think that's what I'm worried about, because you guys see the film breakdowns that I do, and I spend a lot of time putting out these clips and talking in my scouting reports and all that kind of stuff about taking away shooters, and it's just something that Kentucky, honestly, going back to last season, even in Coach Pope's first year, it just hasn't seemed to be something that they focus on at a level of which it takes to take somebody like Lamar Wilkerson away. It just feels like that there's going to be a few times where Kentucky gets lost on Saturday. Now, maybe you get lucky and he misses a few of those and you live to fight another day. But if all of a sudden he starts off 3 for 3, because I think back to the Louisville game. Obviously, Louisville is one of the best 3-point shooting teams in the country. Nobody knows that better than both of our fan bases. But early on in that game, like you're going under on Ryan Conwell, you're going under, and I'm talking about Kentucky, like going under on Isaac McNeely and watching these guys shoot it in. Then it's like, okay, well now we're 4 minutes into the game. We've already let all of their best shooters make one or two. Guess what? They're going to have a lot more confidence going on throughout the game. I mean, something similar kind of happened to Indiana as well playing Louisville, where, it's like before the game even got started, you're down 16-0. It's like, well, shoot, like might as well just pack it up and try again tomorrow now. And Kentucky had a similar feeling really in their game. So I think that you just really have to do your best job individually and as a team to make sure that you're not letting Tucker DeVries get hot. You're not letting certainly Mark Wilkerson get hot. Some of these other pieces that the Hoosiers have from the perimeter, because you've already seen it beat you against a team like Louisville. And I think that Indiana certainly has that same sort of offensive firepower if you let them get going.
And then two guys, sorry, Drew, quick question for me. Two guys on the Indiana side that we haven't really gone super in depth with in this game, Tucker DeVries and Tank Conway. Do you think Kentucky has guys that can match up well with those two?
I think having the length and the athleticism of guys like Cam Williams, who's played quite a bit at the 4 for Indiana recently, and then certainly Andrea Yelovich, I think that those guys can run around on the perimeter with DeVries quite a bit. As a front court guy that has size and wants to play on the perimeter, I think they match up pretty well there. And then, last season, now it's a lot of different players still on Kentucky this year, but Kentucky faced Tatum Conway in the first round of the NCAA tournament last year. He was Troy's starting point guard when we played them in Milwaukee, and did a pretty darn good job on him. Now, unfortunately, we're not trotting out Lamont Butler to guard him this year. I'd feel a little bit better if we did, but I think that he's obviously a guy that isn't a super high percentage 3-point shooter. He's much more of a driver, a facilitator. So I think that if you do a good job of sort of those scouting report specific things of being able to differentiate how you want to guard Tatum Conway, where it's much more important to stay between him and the basket and not let him get paint touches, compared to guys like DeVries and Wilkerson, where you're much more interested in kind of running them off of the 3-point line, making sure you take them away from the perimeter, and you kind of want to force them to play a little bit more inside of the arc. I think if Kentucky can concentrate at a level to kind of differentiate between those sort of players, it'll go a long way for the Wildcats.
Yeah, I think when you look at this Indiana team, like the last weeks kind of showed it how volatile they are. When the 3 balls fall and they can beat anyone. We saw, them smoke Penn State, and then you lose to Minnesota on the road and against a bad Minnesota team. And it's like that volatility. It's what Indiana do we get from 3? But just kind of completely changing the subject, Brandon. You Prep Hoops, you cover a ton of high school ball. Watch YouTube, Kyler too. You guys both watch more high school ball than maybe anyone in the state. Is there a player under the radar right now in Indiana that, people should be looking out for, going into as we get deeper into the season?
Yeah, I think that this 2026 class in Indiana, it certainly has, with Luke Ertl kind of leading the way as the Mr. Basketball candidate, a Purdue signee. But if you go down the rankings a little bit, I think there are some names to watch for. One of the top uncommitted players in Indiana right now, probably the top uncommitted player, is Kai McGrew at Fishers, playing alongside Jason Gardner Jr., Cooper Zachary, a couple names that Indiana fans probably know, especially Gardner Jr. At this point, Kai McGrew's a 6'8", kind of 4'5" man, very athletic, one of the better rebounders in the state of Indiana, playing for a team that won the state championship 2 years ago, went to the state finals last year. He's our highest rated unsigned prospect at Prep Hoops Indiana. Another one being another kind of surefire Division I, probably 2 surefire Division I guys that came in from out of state or came back to the state. DeJohn Hall at Crispus Attucks. He's been around at Tinley, been at Pike, left for prep school. He's now back at Crispus Attucks. He'll likely be a Division I player coming out of this year in the 2026 class. And then Dorian Bowen down at Evansville Bossy. He's sitting out for 30 days after transferring in from Memphis. Some weird I'd say things that I won't get into on this podcast.
Right?
Yeah.
But those are 2 Division I names that are at least new to the state this season, that have offers and will likely end up being Division I prospects. But actually, right now, I mean, I think Kentucky has 18 players already signed to play Division I basketball. So, kind of from a recruiting from a recruiting standpoint, a lot of the kind of bigger names are already kind of signed, sealed, and delivered at this point.
Okay. All right, get back to this game. I think there's only one real place to wrap. It's our prediction for this game. Normally, we'd have a spread or an over/under or something to help us kind of guide our prediction. We got none of that today. I'm assuming Kentucky's going to be favored with it being at Rupp. Brandon, I'll start with you. What's your prediction for this game?
Yeah, I think just to talk about the potential spread first. I'm kind of guessing it'll be like between 3.5, 4.5, 5.5, somewhere in there.
Ken Palm had it around
Ken Palm has it 78, 74.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty reasonable for what you're going to see the spread be. I'm going to be a homer and pick Kentucky, kind of just because we have to win, man. I obviously Indiana fans want to win it just as badly. I'm not, but it's going to be ugly in Lexington if Kentucky loses this game, because right now, even just from some kind of negative recruiting trajectories to the way the football season ended to obviously the way the basketball season has started, it is as dark right now among the UK fan base, as the end of the Calipari era. Every day I wake up and get on KS Board and I feel like we just lost to Oakland again. That's kind of the way, that's the perpetual mood that we're in right now. So I think that being at Rupp, with it being Indiana, you just have to find a freaking way to win this game. So just for the sake of giving a score, let's go. I think it could get a little bit higher scoring. Let's go 83-77 Kentucky.
I think that's pretty fair. I would probably do the exact same kind of analysis right there. Obviously, I think Kentucky it seems like they need it more than Indiana, and that may be kind of weird to say because Indiana doesn't have a super great win, against a top 25 team or anything like that. But my question to you, Brandon, is let's say Indiana does go in and beat Kentucky. Does anything drastic happen with the Kentucky program, or what happens in that situation? I know you probably don't even want to think about that.
I think my computer will catch fire. I think my phone will combust.
The whole On3 website might shut down.
I think KSR might just kind of spontaneously erupt in flames. But to seriously answer your question, no. I think that last year went well enough that, barring literally winning 3 more games this year. I really don't think that Coach Pope is on the hot seat today. I don't think he's really on the hot seat this season. Now, online sentiment probably trends in a more aggressive way, as you guys understand. Yeah. But no, I don't think that this game triggers that. I honestly don't think that probably anything this season triggers that. But you absolutely set yourself up for a situation where next year, you're going into the year with the preseason articles talking about hot seat and that sort of thing. So yeah, acutely drastic, no. But you're setting yourself up for those conversations to be had.
We both have 2 very impatient fan bases, right? And I think
one way of saying it, but they also pay our bills, right? So
yes, they do. They do. So shout out to Kentucky Nation, shout out to Hoosier Nation. So I guess before my pick is going to be Kentucky. I think it's going to be a closer game on the Indiana side than it was Louisville. Louisville's pretty much their Final Four team. Indiana's trying to compete for an NCAA tournament berth and things like that. And I don't expect Kentucky to get out on a 16-0 run. I think that would be, I don't know, kind of insane to happen, but it could happen. But I'm going to go with Kentucky in a close one. Probably the same exact scoring range as what you would do. Kind of moving to the Indiana side, just getting an outsider's perspective with you. When you look at Coach DeVries, obviously it's his first year. The roster is what it is. But do you think that Coach DeVries can kind of turn Indiana around? Turn that program around? Do you think he could be the right guy for them?
I think so. I think you have a coach that's hungry to prove that he can do it at this level. I think that when you look back to, certainly Mike Woodson, he had all of the he checked a lot of the Indiana boxes in terms of playing for Coach Knight and all these different things and being an alum, but he was at the very end of his career. Coach Woodson had nothing to prove to anybody about his basketball acumen, and I think he kind of showed that every day that he wasn't, I just think that he wasn't like super bought in to doing the job, quite frankly. Whereas I think Coach DeVries, like he wants to prove to people that he can be the head coach at Indiana, and I think that he can, prove that he can be the one that really brings the program back around. And I think you've already seen it this season, where it remains to be seen just how good the Hoosiers are. But I know this, they're a heck of a lot more fun to watch, and nobody probably knows that more than you two guys. And I think that that's going to pay dividends, where they're going to be able to continue to get the type of players that play this sort of style, maybe even continue to step up the talent level more and more, because they see like, hey, this is one of the best shooting teams in the country. They're playing at a faster pace. They're shooting a bunch of threes. This is the type of system you want to play in. And, for the same reasons why IU under Coach Woodson didn't get some of the big names, like I think that they're now going to be able to attract some of those because of this style of play. And especially, I think they will be a NCAA tournament team this year and win enough games to have some success. So I think that just be able to build on that going forward, I absolutely think that Coach DeVries is going to be the guy that gets IU back to what IU is supposed to be.
And the last thing I'll say, it's like you kind of touched on a little bit, with the Mike Woodson team or whatever. I felt like, after every single game, win or lose, there's just a lot of head scratching based off like what you just saw on the floor. Like whether it was a win or a loss, it was always head scratching. Like, why did he do this? Why did they run this or whatever? But I think, win or lose with Coach DeVries, I would say probably his first year or two, fans are at least going to, for the most part, leave a game win or loss or win or lose. It's like, hey, they played really hard. They have a fun style of basketball to play. It's more modern style. They shoot a lot of threes. And I think that's good at the end of the day. You just kind of got to let, in my opinion, you just got to kind of let like Coach DeVries kind of right the ship a little bit, get the guys that he needs to get. Because, when you look at the roster right now in Indiana, it's probably not like the team that he necessarily really wanted, but it's the team he had to put together, for 3 weeks. Like he only had a short amount of time to do that. So it'll be interesting to see what Coach DeVries can kind of do and, try to get his guys in the long term.
Yeah, it's honestly, I mean, the situation is very similar to what Kentucky was in last year, where you have a literal 100% roster rebuild and turnover, where you had to go out and in a very short amount of time in the offseason build your roster, 0 through 15. And I think that you're seeing, so far in year one, I mean, they're also playing quite a bit like Kentucky played last year with some pacing and spacing, and the way that your 3-point shooting also makes you a very good cutting team. I was looking at Synergy just a minute ago, like Kentucky, I use one of the most efficient and effective cutting teams in college basketball right now. Like that sure as heck wasn't true when Coach Woodson was there, because there was nowhere to cut into. And now as you have elite 3-point shooters on the perimeter, it gives you all this space around the basket. So that's another thing to watch for with IU, is how well they cut and how effective they are via the cut this year. And like I said, I do think that that'll continue to pay dividends down the stretch. So I'm very impressed with how it's gone, in a very short amount of time. And obviously as you get deeper into Big Ten play, you'll see exactly where this IU team does end up, whether it's top 25, whether it's NCAA tournament, whether it's on the outside looking in. That's still going to play itself out. But I think if I were an Indiana fan, I would at least be encouraged with the early returns of the Coach DeVries era.
Okay, I'm gonna give my prediction real quick before we wrap, but you guys kind of forced me into the corner here. Kyler did this to me last week when we predicted the Louisville game. We're an Indiana podcast, and I can't pick Kentucky. We can't have a clean Kentucky sweep, so I'm going to go Indiana wins a close game because of the reasons you said earlier. The 3 balls fall, and the Mar Wilkers and Tucker DeVries lead the way. And I think similar predictions score-wise just kind of flipped. Brandon, anything you have to promote? Where can people find your content, your breakdowns?
Yeah, all the written work goes on KentuckySportsRadio.com. So I'll have a full IU scouting report up sometime Saturday morning before the game, and then probably sometime on Sunday I'll have a full film breakdown, good, bad, or otherwise, from the game. So I think that just from a kind of quote unquote I'm not really an outsider because I do live here, but from a non-Indiana fan perspective, I think some IU fans will find that content interesting. So you can check that out again on KentuckySportsRadio.com. Also have a YouTube show with a couple of my KSR partners on the Kentucky Sports Radio YouTube channel, which you can subscribe to. You can subscribe to the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show as well, where I do some of my own film breakdowns and some different content. And all that gets promoted on my Twitter with a lot more content there as well, which is at BRamseyKSR.
Yeah, guys, make sure you check that out. Subscribe. And guys, subscribe to the Hoosier on the Hoosier.com website, scouting reports, breakdowns, all that stuff. We got you covered. Kyler and I will be back after the Kentucky game doing a Hoosier post-game wrap-up immediately after the game, so make sure you check that out. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of the Talking About the Hoosiers podcast. We'll be back.